This plant is Scindapsus pictus, Silvery Anne. It's actually a type of cultivated variety of Scindapsus pictus. Pictus actually means painted in Latin, which is understandable because these leaves have this kind of green and silvery markings, which makes this a really beautiful plant. And the cultivated variety of Silvery Anne actually has a little bit more silver in its leaves. But this plant is actually highly variable, and it's been in cultivation for a long time. So this is a plant that's easy to get your hands on, which is a good thing because it is super easy to grow in the house for a lot of different reasons. Now, this plant is actually native to Asia. You could find it in Bangladesh and Thailand, and it's really kind of spread out like all throughout Indonesia and whatnot. But what's interesting about the growth structure of this plant is it's typically this kind of like hanging basket plant, or you could actually trellis it. But in the wild, it will actually shingle. So that means it actually grows flat against a surface. So out in the wild, it might be like a tree, but indoors, it could be a sphagnum pole or a totem or maybe a piece of wood. And I found that like most of mine actually won't shingle, but just a few months ago, the ones in my green wall started to shingle on some of the wood on the back of the vertical garden. So that's pretty cool because if it starts to shingle, like I said, it will start to flatten, and sometimes the leaves will actually get a little bit larger. Now, I have some really interesting stories about this particular plant because I have probably 9 of these in my home, like 8 or 9 of these. This is actually one of the newer ones that I got. And like I said, it's a cultivated variety. It's kind of like popping out of its pot, and it's in this little cache pot right here. So I'm going to have to repot this soon, but it was one of the smaller ones that I could actually show you because some of the other plants that I have are like real beasts. I had one growing in my southwest facing window about 6 years ago, and it was just growing quite large. And actually, about 3 years ago, I moved it into my living room, which has only ambient light. So for those of you who are in the Northern Hemisphere, you'll know that southwest facing window means a lot of intense light throughout the day. And if I'm moving it into my living room with just ambient light, there's not much light there. And I got a little bit concerned because I was like, oh no, this is going to lose leaves and it's not going to acclimatize very well from a southwest facing window to more ambient light. But it did. It actually did totally fine, which brings me to lighting, because a lot of us don't have good lighting in our house. And this particular plant does extremely well across a range of light. So sometimes from low light all the way to what I saw in my house, which is full sun. Also, you'll notice that these leaves are a little kind of like tougher. They're a little rubbery. They're not like extremely thin leaves. And so that just goes to show me that it's probably good at keeping some more of its water and also helping to protect the plant from intense light, which, this plant was in my southwest facing window. So for those of you who are looking for an easy to care plant, I would say that this is probably in my top 10 of easy to care plants. Now, this plant is typically in a more humid environment, so, kind of moderate to high humidity in subtropical and tropical forests, but you don't need to have high humidity in your house. In fact, I have like this plant in more low to moderate humidity, and it's growing just fine. Of course, you may want to water it a little bit more, and you're going to water it based on the light that you're giving it. So when this was in a full sun condition, I was giving it a little bit more water than what I'm doing in my living room, which has only ambient light. So I'm watering it in my living room pretty much about once a week, whereas in the full sun condition, I was watering it maybe 2 to 3 times a week because the soil would just dry out very quickly and the plant was growing at a much higher rate. As far as fertilizing goes, you could actually do something that's a little bit higher on the nitrogen. So fertilizing is N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And because this plant grows fairly quickly, and because it's primarily grown for its beautiful foliage and not necessarily its flowers, you could increase the nitrogen, which will actually keep this nice and green. So if you're going with a synthetic fertilizer, you could do like 20, 10, 10, and then always cut it by half. So if it's saying a half a teaspoon in a gallon, cut it down to about a 1/4 teaspoon in a gallon. And then if you're going with organic fertilizer, then that's fine too. And you could fertilize this on a bi-weekly to monthly basis. And again, it depends on where you have it growing within your particular house. As far as propagation goes, these are super easy. So you actually could take one of these trailing little stems right here, and you'll see these little adventitious roots which are at the nodes, and this is what they use to cling on to in order to affix itself to a totem. But you could actually cut it right behind at a 45-degree angle at one of those adventitious roots, and then take off the last leaf and put that into some moist sphagnum, put it in some water, and that will root up really readily. I have much more about propagating plants such as these on the YouTube channel, so you could go a little bit more in depth than that, but I won't belabor the fact. I'll just let you know that these are incredibly easy to root as far as plants. As far as resiliency and pests, well, you know what? I've never actually had a pest on my Scindapsus pictus, which is pretty amazing because I have had to deal with like mealybugs and aphids and thrips, but for whatever reason, this plant is like a tank and it doesn't get hurt all that much, and it's a pretty prolific grower as well. So again, have to say that this is one of my favorite kind of top 10 houseplants, an easy plant to care for, and also one that will thrive in low light conditions.